On the evening of October 24th, 2023, the forecasters watching the Eastern Pacific saw a tropical storm named Otis drifting toward the Mexican coast. And every tool they had told them the same reassuring story. The official forecast called for a modest storm, maybe a low-grade hurricane, the kind of weather Acapulco had shrugged off 100 times. The computer models agreed. The historical record agreed. And then, over the next 12 hours, Otis did something that the entire science of hurricane forecasting said storms in that place essentially do not do. It detonated. Feeding on ocean water, running abnormally, almost absurdly warm, Otis exploded from a tropical storm into a Category 5 monster, with winds of 165 miles per hour. One of the most violent rapid intensification events ever observed on this planet, and it slammed into a metropolitan area of nearly 1 million people who had gone to bed expecting rain. There was no evacuation because there was no time. The warning window, the sacred buffer that a century of meteorology exists to provide, had collapsed to almost nothing. And when scientists conducted the autopsy on that forecast, the conclusion was more unsettling than any single storm. The forecasters had not failed. The models had not failed. The storm had simply behaved in a way the past said was nearly impossible, because the storm was no longer operating in the climate the past was measured in. That is the real story hiding behind the title of this video, and I want to be precise about it, because this is not hype. When scientists say the weather has reached a point no one alive has ever seen, they do not mean it poetically. They mean it statistically, physically, measurably in ice cores and ocean buoys and satellite records. And what should genuinely unsettle you is not any single heat wave or flood. It is that the rulebook itself, the accumulated record of how hot, how wet, how fast, and how violent weather can be, is failing in real time. And every system we depend on, our forecasts, our building codes, our insurance, our instincts, was calibrated to that rulebook. Tonight I'm going to show you the evidence, the physics, and the handful of events that even veteran scientists describe with words like astonishing. And I'm going to end with the part of this story that the doom merchants always leave out, because it matters just as much. If deep, honest investigations into real threats are what you come here for, subscribe right now, because we go this far into the actual science every single week. Let's start with the literal claim in the title, because it deserves to be tested. Is the weather really beyond anything a living person has seen? Start the clock at the oldest human alive, someone born around 1910, and run the numbers. The years 2023, 2024, and 2025 rank as the hottest years ever measured by instruments, a streak with no precedent in the record. The year 2024 did something symbolic and scientifically significant at once, becoming the first calendar year in which the planet's average temperature ran more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial baseline, the threshold the entire world spent a decade negotiating to avoid. But instruments only go back so far, and this is where the claim gets truly staggering, because scientists can read temperature deep into the past through ice cores, ocean sediments, tree rings, and cave formations, and those archives say the planet is now warmer than at any point in roughly 125,000 years. Sit with that number. Not no one alive, no one in the entire history of human civilization, no pharaoh, no Roman, no medieval farmer, ever lived on an earth this warm. Agriculture itself, every city ever built, the entire 10,000-year experiment of settled human life, all of it happened inside a narrow, stable climate band that we have now exited. And the driver is just as far outside living memory, because the carbon dioxide concentration in the air you are breathing right now is higher than at any time in several million years, since an epoch when sea levels stood dozens of feet higher and there were forests near the poles. Those are the boundary conditions. The weather is simply what those boundary conditions produce, day by day. So, no, the title is not an exaggeration. If anything, it is an understatement. But here is where the story turns from remarkable to genuinely alarming, and it comes down to a single idea from statistics, the idea of the margin. For most of modern history, weather records fell the way sports records fall, in slivers. A heat record beaten by 0.2 of a degree, a rainfall record edged out by a fraction of an inch. That is how a stable system behaves, crowding up against its own limits. What scientists have documented over the past decade and a half is something else entirely. Records not being broken, but being obliterated. By margins, the old statistics said, should essentially never occur. In the summer of 2010, a heat dome parked over western Russia and produced temperatures so far beyond the historical record that the head of the Russian Weather Service declared that nothing like it appeared in 1,000 years of their history, an event later analyzed as 4 standard deviations beyond normal. The kind of outlier a stable climate produces perhaps once in tens of thousands of tries. Then, 11 years later, the Pacific Northwest of North America made Russia look tame. In June of 2021, a heat dome over Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia didn't nudge past old records. It demolished them by margins of 5 degrees Celsius and more. The town of Lytton recorded the hottest temperature in Canadian history 3 days in a row, topping out at 49. 6 degrees, hotter than the all-time record of Las Vegas, in a green mountain valley in Canada, and hundreds of people died. In a region where most homes had never needed air conditioning. When the world's leading attribution scientists analyzed that event, their published conclusion used language science almost never uses, that such heat was virtually impossible without human-caused warming, and the pattern kept spreading beyond land. In 2023, the North Atlantic Ocean ran a fever so extreme that surface temperatures spent months tracing a line completely detached from every previous year on the chart. While at the bottom of the world, Antarctic sea ice collapsed to a low so far beneath the historical range that stunned researchers publicly debated whether the record itself could be believed. A comprehensive scientific review published in the journal Nature in 2025 finally put numbers on the new regime, finding that recent years produced roughly 4 times as many new heat records as an unchanging climate would generate, that unprecedented rainfall events now occur about 40% more often than they otherwise would, and, most telling of all, that record-breaking cold is dwindling towards statistical extinction. One of Europe's leading Earth system scientists has suggested the field may need a new vocabulary entirely, terms like super extremes, for events that don't extend the old distribution but escape it. That is what the data shows. The dice are not merely loaded. Some of them are landing on numbers that were never printed on the dice at all. Why is this happening? The core physics is so simple you can hold it in one sentence, and so consequential it reshapes every storm on Earth. Warm air holds more moisture, roughly 7% more for every degree Celsius of warming, and our warm oceans evaporate more readily, which means the atmosphere over a hotter planet is simultaneously a bigger sponge and a bigger bucket. A bigger sponge, so when weather patterns go dry, the thirstier air strips moisture from soil and forests faster, turning ordinary dry spells into flash droughts and fire seasons. A bigger bucket, so when it rains, there is simply more water available to fall, and the last few years have delivered demonstrations that would strain the credibility of a disaster movie. In April of 2024, the desert city of Dubai received roughly 2 years' worth of rain in a single day, drowning one of the most modern cities on Earth. In October of 2024, a storm cell stalled over eastern Spain and dropped approximately a year of rain in a matter of hours on the region around Valencia, sending walls of water and floating cars through towns and killing more than 200 people in a wealthy European country with modern forecasting. In July of 2025, the Guadalupe River in the Texas Hill Country rose more than 20 feet in under an hour in the pre-dawn darkness of a holiday weekend, sweeping through camps and homes and killing more than 130 people, including children at a summer camp that had stood by that river for nearly a century. And in September of 2024, Hurricane Helene demonstrated the new reach of the bigger bucket, hauling ocean moisture hundreds of miles inland and unloading it on the mountains of western North Carolina, a region that believed reasonably, by all historical evidence, that catastrophic hurricane flooding was a coastal problem. Entire Appalachian towns were torn apart by a storm whose center never came close to them. Every one of these events has the same fingerprint, not rain, but rain rates the local infrastructure was never designed for, arriving in places the old maps called safe. And the oceans are writing the same story in wind instead of water. The fuel of a hurricane is warm seawater, and the world's cyclone basins are now running hot year after year, which is producing the phenomenon that forecasters privately fear most, the one Otis showcased at Acapulco: rapid intensification, storms strengthening explosively in the final hours before landfall. Inside the warning window, after evacuation, decisions have already been made. Hurricane Milton in 2024 leapt to Category 5 over the bathwater of the Gulf with a speed that veteran meteorologists on live television visibly struggled to describe, one of them famously going silent mid-broadcast at the numbers on his screen. This is the specific practical terror hiding inside the title of this video. And it has nothing to do with panic and everything to do with engineering. Every protective system civilization has evacuation timelines, floodplain maps, drainage capacity, dam specifications, building codes, insurance pricing, is a bet placed on the historical record, on the assumption that the future will draw its weather from the same deck as the past. That assumption is now failing, and you can watch it fail in the driest, least dramatic documents on Earth, insurance filings where companies are raising premiums and outright abandoning entire regions, from fire country to flood country. Because the actuaries, the people paid to be unemotional about risk, have run the new numbers and walked away. When the people whose job is pricing disaster stop believing the old maps, that is not media hype. That is the market quietly agreeing with the climate scientists. If you want to see the new atmosphere's strangest signature, though, don't look at any single disaster. Look at what the year 2026 has already done, because the first half of this year has been a masterclass in a phenomenon researchers call weather whiplash. January 2026 ranked among the 5 warmest Januaries ever measured globally, and yet, in the very same month, Europe shivered through its coldest January since 2010 as a wobbling, meandering jet stream spilled polar air southward while the Arctic itself ran abnormally warm. Northern Japan buried itself under the deepest snow in 40 years while record summer heat fed wildfires across Australia, Chile, and Patagonia, and catastrophic floods swept Mozambique, and within weeks, deadly floods and landslides were tearing through Brazil, Peru, and Kenya. In March, a heatwave seared the American Southwest so far outside the seasonal norms that veteran climate writers ranked it among the most astonishing weather events of the century. And in early July, eastern North America compressed the whole new reality into a single afternoon, when Ottawa hit a suffocating humidex of 46 degrees Celsius, then, hours later, was hammered by a record-shattering deluge as the superheated, supersaturated air detonated into storms, flooding streets that had been dangerously hot at lunchtime, while Atlantic City, New Jersey reached 106 degrees Fahrenheit on the 4th of July. Heat and flood, drought and downpour, fire and freeze, no longer taking turns across the seasons, but arriving stacked, adjacent, sometimes on the same day in the same city. That is not the climate anyone alive was raised in. That is the new circulation of a destabilized atmosphere. And 2026 is barely half over, with a developing El Niño that forecasters warned could push global temperatures to yet another record. And there is one more frontier being crossed in this new atmosphere, the most intimate one of all, because it is located inside the human body. Your body survives heat through one mechanism, evaporation, sweat leaving your skin and carrying heat away with it, and that mechanism has a hard physical limit that has nothing to do with toughness or hydration. Scientists measure it with something called the wet bulb temperature, a single number combining heat and humidity, and it works like this. When the air is humid enough, sweat stops evaporating. And when sweat stops evaporating, a human being becomes a furnace with no exhaust, core temperature rising relentlessly no matter how much water they drink, no matter how fit they are, no matter whether they are sitting perfectly still in the shade. For decades, theory placed that absolute limit at a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, a threshold comfortably beyond anything Earth's weather produced, a mathematical curiosity. 2 things have changed. First, laboratory research on real human subjects has delivered unwelcome news, finding that the true danger threshold sits meaningfully lower than the theoretical one, closer to 31 degrees wet bulb even for the young and healthy, and lower still for the old, the ill, and anyone doing labor. And second, the weather has started arriving at the door. Monitoring stations around the Persian Gulf and in the Indus Valley of Pakistan, in cities like Jacobabad, have already recorded brief episodes brushing against these limits, hours during which the outdoor air itself crossed into territory where an unprotected human body cannot shed heat, something essentially absent from the instrumental record of the 20th century. These episodes are still short, still rare, still local. But they are the first of their kind in the history of measurement, and every projection shows their frequency, duration, and geographic reach growing with each fraction of a degree of warming, spreading toward South Asia's farmlands, the Gulf's cities, and eventually corners of the American South. Understand what that means. The heat waves of the Old World were dangerous. Some of the heat waves of the New World are becoming, for spans of hours, something categorically different, whether outside the operating range of the human machine itself. No generation of our species has had to write that sentence before. Now let me deal directly with the 2 loudest wrong answers to all of this, because they bracket the truth from opposite sides. The first says, the climate has always changed. There were ice ages, there were warm periods. This is just another cycle. And the first half of that sentence is completely true, which is exactly why scientists drilled the ice cores in the first place. The climate has always changed, and the archives show precisely how, over thousands and tens of thousands of years, paced by slow wobbles in Earth's orbit. What the archives contain nothing like is the current event, warming of this magnitude compressed into a single human lifetime, tracking not the orbit but the carbon, with a speed that is itself the fingerprint. Natural cycles are real, and this is not one, any more than a wildfire is a campfire, because both involve flame. The second wrong answer points at every cold snap, at Europe's frigid January, and declares the whole thing refuted. But a warming world does not abolish winter. It destabilizes the jet stream that used to keep winter penned in the Arctic, occasionally flinging frozen air south even as the planet's average climbs, which is why the ratio is what matters. And the ratio is brutal. Record heat multiplying, while record cold slides toward extinction. And there is a third wrong answer, quieter and more seductive than the other 2. The voice that says it is too late, the weather is broken, nothing matters now. That one deserves a direct response, and it gets it right after this. Because you live inside this new atmosphere, here is what actually protects people, starting tonight. Respect heat as what the statistics show it to be, the deadliest weather on Earth, deadlier than hurricanes and floods combined in most years, and a killer that works quietly, indoors, at night, on the elderly, the isolated, and the medicated, which means the single most protective act in a heat wave is checking on a specific person you already know. Rewire your flood instincts, because the phrase, "it has never flooded here," has become one of the most dangerous sentences in the English language. So know your real elevation, never drive into moving water, and treat a stalled storm over your watershed as an emergency in progress. Take forecasts seriously earlier, because in the era of rapid intensification, the storm you act on must be the storm in the watch, not the storm you wait to see. And the Texas River and the Spanish flood both taught the same lesson, at terrible cost, that the gap between warning and water can now be minutes. And read your insurance documents like the risk map they secretly are, because where coverage is retreating, the smart money has already told you something. The weather has reached a point no one alive has ever seen. That is simply true, written in 3 record years, in oceans running fevers, in records falling by margins that break the mathematics of the old world. And yes, it is frightening, because it is supposed to be the way a smoke alarm is supposed to be, but fear is only the first half of the signal. Subscribe now if you want stories like this every week, told straight, with the real science and none of the hype. Drop a comment telling me the most extreme weather you have personally witnessed and where, because that record of living memory matters. And share this with someone who still thinks the old rules apply. Their safety may literally depend on updating. Before you go, here's the part the doom merchants always leave out, and it is not a consolation prize, it is the other half of the physics. Everything that makes this story terrifying is also what makes it actionable. Because the same science that attributes these disasters to warming shows, with equal confidence, that the severity of what comes next scales directly with what humanity emits from here. This is not a cliff we have already gone over. It is a dial, and every fraction of a degree still on the table is measured in heat waves that do or don't happen, in rainfall that does or doesn't fall, in storms that do or don't find that last band of hot ocean. And the response is not hypothetical. The clean energy transition is no longer a projection. It is the largest infrastructure build-out in human history, proceeding at a pace that surprises even its advocates. The science of extreme weather has matured from vague warnings into precision attribution, able to tell a city within days how much of its disaster was loaded by warming, which is exactly the information that forces building codes, insurance, and courts to change. The United Nations is racing to extend early warning systems to every human on Earth within this decade, because the difference between Valencia's death toll and a near miss is, again and again, minutes of warning and the will to act on it. And communities that harden themselves, that shade their streets, restore their floodplains, bury their power lines, and drill their evacuations, are already demonstrably surviving events that devastate their unprepared neighbors. No one alive has seen this weather, that much is settled. But no one alive has seen what humans do about it yet either, because that part of the record is still being written, and unlike the temperature curve, it is being written by choice. The atmosphere has shown us its new rules. The only question left, the one being answered this decade, is how fast we learn to live by them, and how hard we work to stop them getting worse. That answer belongs to the living. Make it a good one.